looks like everyone's all settled in, and I guess as we start, I'll introduce myself, and then I guess we'll go around and do I know most of us have met through the workshops we've done and everything. Is there anyone here who didn't come to the scenario building workshops we did about a year ago? Okay, so good. I'm gonna present some of what we did there, and then really part of what we did and what we will be presenting today is we developed a dashboard, a tool where you can look at things like flood risk and flood insurance rates and kind of look at your community on there. So what we're gonna do today is I'm gonna spend maybe 20 minutes or so doing a presentation of the work that we did. I guess it's been almost a year to the day, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Scott Hemmerling. I'm a research scientist at the Water Institute. We're a nonprofit 501c3 located in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. A lot of my work focuses on trying to understand the human impacts of Louisiana's coastal crisis. So that could involve doing things like GIS mapping and just things like that, but also what we're doing here, gathering information from community members and finding out what does it actually mean to live in these risky areas. And engineers and a scientist up in Baton Rouge sometimes don't understand what the impacts of not just climate change, but the coastal restoration projects themselves, what we do. And we talked at the meeting last year about home elevations and relocations, and there's a lot of talk within the state and the master plan on voluntary acquisition. Well, what does it mean if we have a buyout in the communities? What does that do to the communities? Is it good? Is it bad? Probably a mixture of both, and that's a bit what we got into last year. And then we took that information and we developed a dashboard with a lot of flood risk information that we're actually beta testing, we're beta testing, but we're showing it to y'all today and just getting your feedback, and then we'll go back and improve it, and that's gonna be something that's gonna be available to the community. So, again, I'm Scott Hemmerling, and
hi, I'm Allison Hartling. I'm an associate planner at the Institute. I do planning and policy research on all the things Scott just mentioned. So my day varies depending on what the project is. I'm looking at groundwater right now, as well as the shrimping community down in Blackman's Parish, just all and resilience strategies and planning for cities like Mobile, Alabama, and just across the Gulf Coast.
and anything policy and things like that are like, okay, that's out of my realm. Like,
We make
she's
a
the
good
expert.
team because we fill in those gaps.
Hello, I'm Michael Roberts. I'm with the Coastal Trust, pending 501c3, checking my email every day, waiting for that to come in. But I work out of Baton Rouge, Savannah, Georgia, and then Washington, D.C. But it's coastal engineering, coastal conservation, whether it's working with a local community to develop an asset management plan for their water distribution system or expanding the national wildlife refuge. So kind of anything and everything related to communities and watersheds. So.
I'm John Burgoyne. I'm a local realtor with Century 21 in Morgan City. And I'm here because I'm starting to see the economic effects of the high flood insurance. And so I need to know if I need to change my career or move to the city further north. So that's why I'm here. So.
I'm Lord Russo, I'm a ladder and bloom, and like John, I'm a real estate agent in the area. And we both have the same concerns, so we came together.
I'm Kelly Williams. I'm a homeowner in Stephensville, and I'm concerned about if I need to stay or move. Susan Loop, I'm a landowner in Bayou Estates in Stephensville.
Catherine Holcomb, St. Mary XL, and Greg Garisco is recording this so that we can put it on YouTube, just to let everybody know, because we thought this was a really important report.
Hi, I'm Monica Mancuso, and I'm with St. Mary XL.
I'm Virgil Allen with the Red Museum and local resident.
I'm Bryce Murrow with Oilfield Divers Monument, in case you need a diver.
Mark Dillon, St. Mary Parish Council District 8.
Ed Bergeron, local resident, observing.
Mike Ricotta, St. Mary Living District.
Greg Grisco Marketing, and St. Mary XL.
Cindy Cutrera, Economic Development Manager for the Port of Morgan City.
Laura Meadows, Senator Brett Alland's office, and a homeowner.
Duval Author, Mayor Berwick.
Randy Blanchard, live in Stevensville.
Tanya Blanchard, resident of Stevensville.
Charlotte Ratcliffe, resident of Stevensville.
Carol Amaday, state rep, and very concerned about insurance rates.
Yes.
Well, that's gonna be part of what comes up, because I think whether you were in the Stevensville workshop last year or Morgan City, I think flood insurance is a key issue, and there's been a couple of significant changes in the last year with flood insurance. But I'd like to thank, first of all, St. Mary Excel, Catherine and Monica. Every time we come here, we get a great turnout and the perfect mix of representatives, residents, business owners, and that's, you know, we get such a strong group of voices, and yeah, I'd like to thank both of you again for helping us make this possible. We're good? Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm gonna go through and discuss the project that we began last year. And this is, we had 4 communities that we work with: Morgan City, no, I'll show that a little bit in the presentation. Morgan City and Stevensville, but we also went down to Cameron in Southwest Louisiana and Slidell. And really, I think a lot of what I'm gonna talk about today, particularly on some of the graphics, is gonna be what we heard from Morgan City and Stevensville. But I'm also gonna say, across the coast, the issues you're facing are not that different. And to what a small community of a couple hundred people in Southwest Louisiana, or a growing area like Slidell are experiencing, the same things: flood insurance and just risk. Do we have to stay? Do we have to go? All of that. So I'm gonna do a little bit of the presentation, and really the main thing we wanna do is really show you all the tool that Allie's gonna show us and kind of go through, get your feedback on it, and find out, make sure we're getting you the information you need to make your decisions. There we go. Wouldn't be a meeting if we didn't have a little technical glitches at the beginning. So again, I'm just gonna talk about what we introduced y'all to last year. Really what we're talking about is these community tipping points. And what we mean by a tipping point is really what is between people staying and going. Because a lot of times when you talk to a lot of people, they're like, we don't wanna leave. This is our home, this is, and no matter, I mean, not just across Louisiana, everywhere, people are attached to a place. And people say, we're never gonna leave. This is where, but when you start talking to people and you start thinking through kind of these scenarios of what it takes, eventually you reach a point when it's like, people are like, yeah, if that happens, we'll have to leave. So what we did was a series of scenario building workshops with residents to really identify what these tipping points are. So if we don't do any action at all, if we don't do home elevations, if we don't do any type of buyout, what would the impacts be on your community? And if that happens, then what? And if that happens, then what? We kind of build out these decision trees. And those of you who are involved in the workshops, you'll see the pictures of, Post-it notes all over the place. But really the idea is eventually you reach a point when you see, okay, it's not gonna be this one event that causes people to leave. It's this kind of cascading events. And some of it, as a lot of people here are interested in insurance, that was a big topic of conversation. So before we started with the workshops, we actually met with Monica and Catherine and our partners in the other communities and did driving tours of the communities. And we spent a day with Monica and Catherine, having them drive us all over, showing us the different places, and just, we didn't want to come into the communities and, at least not know the locations that y'all are talking about. And actually through that process, that was where we found out about Stevensville, which the idea was we're gonna come into Morgan City, but when in that driving tour and they took us through Stevensville, it's very close to Morgan City, but it's different from Morgan City. And it's like, okay, there's gonna be a different set of voices, a different set of issues in Stephensville versus Morgan City. So just through that process, Ally and I added that fourth community to our workshop because we felt like it was important to gather the voices of that particular community.
Thank
Oh, thank you. But, so
Yeah,
in fall of 22, we did so about a year ago, our workshops in Stephensville, Morgan City, and then we went to Lake Charles. That was actually for Cameron, but those of you who know Cameron, there's a, river running down the middle, and you can take the ferry across, but they said it never runs. So if you have people on both sides, even though it's literally 5 minutes apart, if the ferry's running, if it's not running, they have to go all the way up and around the lake. So we're like, well, let's go up here, and then people on both sides of the river will drive up and attend our workshops. So again, in Stephensville, 11 participants, we had longtime residents from a variety of backgrounds. We had a government representative, St. Mary Parish. We came in, we had 13 participants, and again, representatives, nonprofits, government sections, including a mayor who, thank you. And then Cameron, we had 7 participants there, a mix of residents and government representatives. And then in Slidell, the same thing, we had 7 participants, but we had a mix of residents, representatives from nonprofit and local businesses in there. And the reason I really like these 2 pictures, because it really highlights how we went about doing these workshops. Those of you who are, in the Morgan City one recognize this. It was, we're in the big fancy arena type setting, but Stephensville, the night before, we're actually in the elementary school library, and that was the best place to have the meeting. And again, so we went to where you all were to gather your information. But one of the things we also did was presented these posters, which I don't know if we made those, I think we did make those available to Monica and Catherine, but using the master plan data, and again, this was a year ago, so the 2023 master plan didn't come out until February or March of this past year. But this was really the first time, Stephensville was first, Morgan City was second, the first time that we got a chance to show some of the modeling results from the 2023 master plan to really start thinking about economic damages and what's coming. And I mentioned before that we did had our Post-it notes. I think one of the ideas was, again, as I mentioned, we go through and say, okay, if we do home elevations, for example, what will happen if we do the home elevations? You can see we kind of have all these multiple things that can happen. And then if that happens, then what? If that happens, then what? We kind of built out this decision tree. I think after COVID, as you all know, I'm pretty sure we said that. We're like, can we do this online? We can have like digital Post-it notes and stuff. And we're like, tired of looking at computers. Let's do this. Let's break out the poster. And we had some really good conversations as we were building kind of these decision trees. And you'll see some of the quotes and the results and some of the things that we heard from community members. And one other thing we did as we were building the decision tree, we had some of the people helping us who were typing up everything into an Excel spreadsheet as we were building those decision trees. And then Stephensville had a bit of technical glitches, so we weren't able to actually print these out for y'all, but we gathered the information from. But the idea is, what's the probability of these events? We built these decision trees out, but just because something could happen, what do people think the likelihood of that actually happening? Is it high likelihood, low likelihood? And then what are the consequences? The economic consequences, the social and cultural consequences, and overall. So is this a high likelihood event but it's not gonna really make a difference? Or is it something that's gonna happen very rarely, but if it does happen, it's gonna be devastating for the community? So each one of those Post-it notes we saw in that decision tree, we have this type of information on. And again, I think one of the things we want to point out was just some of the things that we learned from community members where, particularly in Morgan City, you don't have much issues with, definitely not storm surge or things like that. It's like, well, we don't really have much issues with home flooding here. But then, well, what about street flooding? So in the conversation, well, yeah, we have street flooding all the time. Someone said, yeah, and when we have street flooding, these people are going through the streets in their pickup trucks at 40 miles an hour, they're putting all these wakes in, and suddenly the wake from the cars is creating damage. So we have flood damage in our homes. It's not from the storm itself, it's from people driving in the streets. And then once we know that, it's like, what happens once you get the water in your home? Well, insurance claims. The insurance might not cover it, or the insurance does cover it. If it does cover it, we still have the high deductibles we have to deal with. If they don't, we might have to take the insurance company to court. So, and then if you can't pay for repairs, people might just live in their damaged home. And so we actually presented to our group in Slidell yesterday, and someone said there was someone there still living in the same damaged home from Katrina. And we're going on 20 years, and it's like, we've got to, that shouldn't be happening in this day and age. But there are people, you will live in your damaged home, and then your quality of life is decreased when you live in your damaged homes. So really it's, this all comes back to, well, we might not have flooding, but maybe we can control that street flood. What can we do to prevent all of these kind of cascading effects from happening? And then one of the things on kind of the analytical side, once we got those spreadsheets entered in and, kind of, let's go through and on a scale of 1 to 5, what's the likelihood of these different effects? And this is just an example of some of the effects we have. But, if we look, okay, if we elevate your homes, we're gonna have to climb stairs. Well, 4.5, 5.7 out of 5. Yeah, that's definitely gonna happen. It's gonna have some pretty severe economic and social consequences. And in some cases, it's, if you elevate your home, there are some positive benefits to elevating your home. It's just some of these, other things that have these negative impacts. So we're able to look at these high likelihood events and really, and I just graphed this out just to kind of look. If we look at the likelihood of the event here, and then is it bad or is it good? So home elevations, we can see there's a lot of kind of high likelihood good things that will come out of home elevations, but there's also high likelihood bad things that come out. And some of that, we will see some of the quotes related to that. So, and here's just some examples of some of the things we did. We looked at each one of those Post-it notes and said, is this a social or cultural impact? Is it a physical or environmental impact? Is it financial? Does it affect quality of life? If your home is elevated, it's inconvenient. Letting your dog out. You can't just let your dog out if you're in an elevator. Well, in that case, that's a quality of life issue. It's not an economic issue. It could be a health issue if people have to go up and down the stairs with their dog. But things like that we just don't consider generally when we're thinking about these types of things. Now, I don't expect everyone to read what's on the slide now, but this is just an example of how we took some of those Post-it notes and we built some of those connections in. And the home flooding, you see these 6-sided things, that's when home flooding occurs. So if we don't take any action, there's a couple of places we are gonna experience flooding. If we do no action, we're gonna experience some home flooding. And again, it could come through like we said, the wake from cars, it could be storm. There's gonna be a lot of, if we see the circles, that's when people leave. So in this case, and it's difficult to see on here, but this is really, the cost of insurance is too high. Flood insurance rates increased. That is where, in this do-nothing scenario, where we see people leaving the community. It's an economic issue. If you can't afford the insurance, ultimately, that's the one thing in this whole kind of do-nothing scenario that we see that will cause people to leave. And as we saw in the previous slide, a lot of cases, people are willing to live in homes that honestly need to be cleaned up and you can't live in moldy homes. And unfortunately, that's what I'm kind of highlighting here is that flood insurance increase in this case. And I'll also say that's what we saw, we presented in Slidell with theirs. It was the exact same thing there. The paths were a little different to get there, but no matter what pathway we took, it got down to cost between people staying and going. And then if the water's in your home, if the water's in your home, what's gonna happen? Well, we're gonna have to repair the damage. Well, then you're gonna have to deal with contractors, you might get a bad contractor. But we have property owners displaced, you could have insurance claims. Insurance does cover it, insurance doesn't cover it. Again, like we saw in the previous one, high deductibles, or you have to take your insurance company to court. But there's also, if you can't pay for repairs, low-income families can't pay for repairs. Both of those lead to people living in their damaged houses, which again, mold, health, quality of life issues. But even if we look at doing home elevations, I mean, it comes down to, do we have financial support? Is there any financial support to help residents elevate? And then if we get financial support, residents could elevate. Sometimes some residents might. You do or you don't. We might do it on our own if we have to. That's very rare that people can afford to elevate on their own with any type of financial support. But ultimately, if we look at where the circles are here, even if you do get financial support, if you can't afford the match, if there's a match with that, if you can't afford to match, we might take no action at all, which means going back to the status quo. The same thing here, if you get no financial support, go back to the status quo. And that's what will ultimately, we'll say we might have to leave then. So, but what we do see, as expected, the 6-pointed icon we had before, which was flooding. Like, we don't have flooding issues here, but people who can't stay, we still end up, they might have to abandon their properties. And then voluntary acquisition, which is a term used by the state. It's essentially a voluntary buyout program for people in hazardous areas, which on the surface, and it is, in many ways it is a good thing, but how it is implemented, even if people do take the buyout, there's a lot of, you have isolated low-lying areas leave, but you lose that sense of spirit for the community. The churches suffer, you have less people, you have less tithing in the communities. So once you start, and you'll notice the circle I said is when people leave on all of those previous ones. In a buyout program, we're starting with the circle. And I think that's part of, people don't want to lose residents, they don't want to lose community members, and a voluntary buyout program, by definition, will cause you to lose residents. But then your maintenance of the vacant land, it's a burden on the local government. When you have a buyout program like this, you can't redevelop the land. It's got to stay vacant, and the parish is generally responsible for maintaining that property. And I hadn't heard the term until someone mentioned it in Slidell. They said the mayor of Birmingham calls it snaggletooth development. When you have one home, vacant lot, one home, vacant lot, because that's ultimately, with this buyout program, the way it's currently set up, how that's gonna happen. Because you can't redevelop the land, you're gonna have these vacant properties. So you might have someone surrounded completely by vacant land, which in some cases might be a good thing, but it might be a bad thing. And things like rodents and animals, I mean, in some cases, this green space might take them off of your property, some cases it might entice them in. That doesn't seem like a big deal, but for a lot of people, there is kind of this sense of fear and anxiety. But there's also, there's a stigma. And I think y'all were the only ones that mentioned that. But if your community is having these buyouts, there's concern that people from the outside looking in will be like, whoa, if they have these buyout programs, this isn't a safe place. And then if you have this stigma, local businesses you might lose local business opportunities. And then residential decline. People will be less likely to come here. That's the fear of kind of this stigma of being, but everywhere in coastal Louisiana, you have some areas that are more low-lying than others. But that loss of tax base, when people leave, and that's really some of these cascading effects, when people leave and you lose your tax base, I think, as we talked about last year, a lot of the school funding is based on how many residents you have. So your schools could lose funding, and you kind of, again, in some of these, there's there's obviously positive benefits for residents who are taking a buyout and leaving. You might have a greater sense of peace because you are somewhere new, but you're also separated from your family, and there's a lot of social isolation, especially if you have one resident here, you have to move outside of the 500-year floodplain. You basically might be completely separated and isolated from the rest of your residents. So for the rest of this, I'm gonna kind of go through, and some of you have seen some of these quotes already, but these are just some of the different quotes we heard, and I think from different communities, from our 4 communities we talked to, and I feel like a lot of these are kind of probably gonna resonate with you, no matter which community said it. One of the concerns with a voluntary buyout program, lots are not maintained. There's no doubt that the landowner that relied on that property is gonna make darn sure that property is taken care of. Whereas the state just takes it over, it's just another polygon on Google Earth. And other than that, what happens? The state can't afford to take on more land that you can't maintain. The best thing that can happen is if the property stays in the hands of the landowners. Kind of the snaggletooth development that we heard that term yesterday. As someone from our Morgan City workshop. So you have a subdivision, what if half of them take the buyout, the other half doesn't? They're still in the flood-prone area, so you accomplish absolutely nothing. You're not gonna have 100% buy-in on the buyout. So. Then slide up. Loss of social connectedness, as I mentioned. So I'm in a neighborhood right next to hers. Her house didn't flood, but mine did. We're a family. You're offering her a buyout. Because I flooded, you're offering me a lot less, whatever. But can you move us together? You know, we're a family of 6 houses. Can we still go to a neighborhood and have, within a block or 2, 6 houses versus you over there? Now you 5 miles away and that way around. Because so many communities around Louisiana in particular are so interconnected versus other places that I've lived before. That's one of the big concerns we heard about the buyout program is besides what it does to the neighborhoods that are left behind with that kind of the vacant land and everything, but breaking apart communities. In Lake Charles, health and safety issues. This is related to home elevations. They're talking about one of their neighbors, their daughter was a high school volleyball player, and she was in a full leg cast. So she injured her knee in their elevator, 12 feet? So realistically, she can't climb the stairs. Her mom and dad can't really safely carry somebody, and so every time she had a doctor's appointment or a rehab appointment or therapy, the ambulance goes out and carries her down in that gadget. And we don't think about things like that, but you know, this is probably a young family. We don't need to worry about an elevator or any of these things, but what happens if suddenly your daughter's in a cast and can't make it up and down the stairs, and you have to call the EMS to come take you to therapy? And I would imagine particularly in Cameron, probably 1 ambulance there. So I mean, there's other things that could happen. So those are just the types of things that people need to consider when we think about home elevation. Yeah, it's good, but how do we address some of these issues? Stephensville, I think this is the one quote that Catherine was struck by last time I presented it. I don't know how to quantify it, but it's cultural. You're protecting a culture. To me, if you can't live here and you can't live on the values and the water and the lifestyle, everybody still wants the same things for the people. I just can't think of the word for it. You're teaching your kids to grow up the way that you grew up. You're just refreshing the Stephensville way of life. Things like that are really difficult to include in your numerical modeling and things like that. How do you include that way of life in the planning process? But I think every one of you here can attest to that way of life, and the reason you're in your community, that sense of community is very real. And then in the receiver communities. So if people are leaving, it's not just what you're leaving behind, but where are they going? So who are they considering for these voluntary buyouts? It's usually lower income communities. So once you take that community and say, we're gonna offer you these funds to move, and now you have to move outside of the 500-year floodplain. Listen, you know how Louisiana is. If you gotta move outside of the 500-year floodplain, and the floodplain stops on 1st Street, they're all gonna move to 2nd Street. That's what's gonna happen. They're gonna go to 2nd Street, they're gonna keep themselves as close as possible to the previous location. And so what is it that's gonna happen with all the other people that are already on Second Street? They'll all be like, no, they came from here, we don't want them here. It's a real concern with people moving to another area. Are you going to be accepted? And we talked yesterday about what happens if you have a middle school student that, middle school is hard enough without being thrown, into a brand new school. And, I like this quote. Why don't people trust the government? Because what brainiac came up with the idea to have a buyout that don't have the answers to all the questions you just asked? And I have a feeling that probably everyone in this room would agree that we need to be asking these questions. And we don't need to, I'm gonna kind of briefly explain these, but Allie's gonna show, some of these will be in the dashboard that I talked about. And I'll say the dashboard that we developed from this, we'll be looking at things like, one of the things that came up is loss of facilities. If we lose the tax base, we might have fewer EMS stations, might have fewer fire stations. So one of the things we did, on hearing that and thinking through it, the solid lines are your drive time to the nearest, in this case, EMS. So you can see from 2, really up to like 6 or 7 minutes. But what happens if that first EMS station closes? Because of the what's the second closest? And you can see the dash line is the time it takes to get to that second one. So if we lose, and it's even more striking with your fire station, if you have to shut down a fire station, and with EMS and fire stations, even if it's 5 to 10 minutes longer, I think we talked to Acadian Ambulance before, and I said they want to try to be able to reach everyone within 10 minutes. Well, there's some people that we're going out or a bit beyond that. So that's some of the things we need to consider, and it's not just EMS and fire, it's things like, out of all the ones we looked at, because there's so few of them, we're now looking at 25 to 30 minutes from, right now, 5 to 10 minutes to the closest trauma hospital. If we remove that, you're adding 30 minutes to that time to get to a trauma hospital. So that, we'll have that information in the dashboard for all of you to look at. I'm gonna kind of skip ahead so we can get to that a little bit. I did mention some of these things are difficult to quantify. We still need to capture them. Things like sense of place, permanent impacts of losing a church, elderly disabled, quality of life, aesthetics. That's one thing people say about elevation, particularly if you have a elevated house, unelevated house, elevated, the aesthetics. Something being ugly makes a difference. In the overall scheme of things, you might say, well, what difference, why are we talking about this being ugly? What's it? Well, are we interested in property values? Are we interested in bringing people into a community? Aesthetics matter when we think about things like that. So in general, from those workshops, from all 4 communities are generally opposed to voluntary acquisition. They recognize that there's good aspects to it. But in general, it's kind of, we thought going into, because we were here, when we went to Slidell, and I know the big problem in Slidell is massive amount of people moving in from New Orleans. So their population is growing. So we went into Slidell thinking, okay, well, we're not gonna hear, they might be, okay, we're gonna be in favor of voluntary acquisition, but they're not. The same issues that all the other communities we talk to, whether it's a community losing population, like in Cameron in Southwest Louisiana, or one growing like in Slidell. No, it's seen as the same thing, that snaggletooth development, that breaking apart sense of community. Voluntary acquisition is seen as most harmful to the sense of community. Loss of people, decline in tax base, and loss of services, as we saw in the few previous charts. And that patchwork approach leads to overall decline in quality of life. Now and there's a couple people on our team who developed the risk models for CPRA. David Johnson from Purdue, who I think you all had a chance to meet last year at our workshop. He was one of the originators of that risk assessment model. So that's one of the things particularly for the next master plan. If they're gonna talk about voluntary acquisition, we need to be thinking through some of these issues. What does it really mean? Is this patchwork approach the right way to do it? These are things that really need to be considered as we think about moving forward with these programs. Non-structural mitigation, whether it's home elevations or a voluntary acquisition program, pretty much across all the communities, putting a lot of funding into that is seen as diverting money away from structural protection. It's viewed as not being a good return on investment, or we're throwing money away. So there's that kind of balance of how do we, that non-structural versus structural. There's some areas where realistically, the geology might not allow you to put levees when you get, way out onto, closer to the coast. There is a limit where you can do that. But, do we have that right balance of structural versus non-structural protection? And then the last thing I want to mention, population loss. That's really whether it is driven by an acquisition program, whether it's driven by doing nothing and people just leaving because of insurance rates, which again, that is one of the primary drivers of people leaving. But once you lose population, there's really a downward spiral in these communities. And I think that's what the decision tree showed. When you lose that tax base, when you might lose your school, or your school might go from a B school to a C school. That matters to parents, and so you start seeing one thing lead to, and you kind of get into this downward spiral for the communities. And really part of what we want to do through this is identify where those spirals start and work with the decision makers to try to do what we can to mitigate those ahead of time. So with that, that's kind of the 4 workshops we had in a nutshell. But I think the next thing we did, again, is we wanted to say, what can we give back to the community? How can we get this information that we gathered, plus master plan information, master plan data, the risk assessment, flood insurance data. So we worked with David Johnson, again from Purdue, and one of our dashboard gurus at the Water Institute to really, we also worked on the master plan to pull a lot of these data together to develop a dashboard where you can see the data and you can use that. So Allie, I don't know if we're ready for you to, and if anyone has any questions and also if anyone needs to take a break, just let us know.
That's what I was about to say. If anyone didn't get food or coffee, if you want to just take a few minutes while we're transitioning, please help yourself. There's so much food. Please. So, that was interesting.
I got a couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
Sure.
So where was ground zero for this idea? Where did it come from, this bio-housing community?
So this is, let me be clear too. So voluntary acquisition, I mean, it's gone back in history. I mean, there have been whole communities, I think, in the 1930s that moved their entire community. So it's not a new concept. And where it gets complicated is not every buyout program is the same. Sometimes they come from federal funding, maybe through FEMA. In the case of the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, the statewide buyout program that Louisiana has looked at, that funding has come from HUD. And in some cases, right, they're not looking at individual buyouts, they're looking at whole community, or not whole community, but like sections of neighborhoods that have flooded repetitively, like the mayor said. So it's not.
And the reason we're looking at it in particular is because it is one of the key pillars of the master plan that is very well undefined.
But not in every community either.
Because
so
it's a last
they're looking at places like, for example, in Cameron, right, where we've gone, those homes are already elevated 13, 14, 15 feet in the air.
After Rita,
So,
everyone who could afford to come back after Rita came back and elevated.
Right, but typically for federal funding, they will not go higher than that, because if you go higher than that, there's a lower return on investment, because then your wind insurance, like wind and hail are higher. Right, so it doesn't, it's not financially or economically feasible.
Okay, I understand all of that.
Yeah.
So I come from an area where they moved whole communities up in Newfoundland,
Right.
in Eastern Canada, 100 years ago, and all those people that were there are dead, yet all their grandchildren still bemoan the fact that they moved from their
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah.
And in this case, in the state, I mean, the state is, I don't think we'll ever see an involuntary acquisition or a forced buyout program as part of the state's master
So
plan.
as part of the master plan, have you guys gone to elevated communities that have been raised or bio communities and interviewed them? Find out what, and put that data in?
Yeah, that's what, in Cameron in particular, that's why we went to that area, because we knew that, they've lost a massive amount of population since Rita, and then Laura and Delta hit that area also. But we knew that most of the people there, who are there, came back and elevated. But, yeah, so we've gone into there, but right now, this is kind of, we wanted to pilot it in kind of these areas across the coast to try to get to some of these issues.
One last comment is, one of the other things about moving communities is a way for your tax base you're talking about. You start out as a city, you become a town, then you become a village. You lose a whole income that you get from the state and federal governments for being, the bigger you are as a city and a town, you get more revenue. So, I mean, that's a huge decline in the communities. And I'm disappointed I don't see on the sticky notes, the shotgun. If you remember, I'm the shotgun guy.
They're in there.
Well, I was involved in the buyout here at St. Mary Parish, and it was voluntary, and, but I mean, I'm gonna tell you, it was just like, there was a line right here, and everybody over here was, we wanna jack up the house, but we're gonna move. From the people on that side, I ain't moving, I ain't leaving, get the hell out, I'm through with y'all. So I mean, it was just one or the other.
Yeah.
And, it really ruins your community. I think it does. I mean, look, yeah, I know that they're gonna put a house up on the town, all around Bayou Vista, all around Patterson, but yet we're paying flood insurance. And when we have a flood, we can never, I know it's nice to have that feeling in the back. Well, it's there if you need it. That's what insurance is supposed to be all about anyway. But we never use it. We never get a chance to use it, thank goodness. But we don't use it. We're paying it for a few people to take advantage of it. And I think they really need to look at, and they're so slow to react. Mike, in Berwick, do we have any flooding concerns? I mean, we have.
No, and it goes back to, a lot of this stuff doesn't make sense at all. And whenever they came down with risk rating 2.0, the first thing I did was kind of dove in to see what's happening. For instance, Mayor Duval lives in Berwick. I live in Patterson. I think the whole parish is getting to the point of probably one of the best protected in the state.
In the state, yeah.
But for, I don't know, since the 40s, the Berwick-Patterson area has always been one of the most protected because it's in a loop. I live at an elevation of 8.5 feet inside of that protection. I called my insurance agent and said, hey, run me a flood policy, just to find out. Previous, I'm in an X zone, no flood, $420. I had to run one last year, whenever this stuff came down, it was $4,800. Now look, and I'm talking about an area that if my house floods, we're biblical. I mean,
Right.
it's not anything.
I looked when
500 year, 100 year, we're talking about biblical events at this point.
When risk rating 2.0 came out, the first place I looked was St. Mary Parish, and I think the second highest increase in the state is St. Mary Parish.
Now, there's another thing, and just for the people that do live in St. Mary, I started digging around in the NLD, the National Levy Database. Again, I was trying to figure out why. There were some discrepancies in levy elevations. We just are in the process of going through a complete reeval of the entire system, which includes Morgan City, Amelia, Stephensville, not Stephensville, sorry, all the way out to the west end, to see if we can correct those discrepancies. But it takes 2 years to correct that in risk rating 2.0. So,
we do empathize, because, I mean, we live here too, and, you know, fortunately, I've seen my rate go up, but not as, like, as astonishingly as that. And just wanna clarify, this project was not about seeking out flood insurance discrepancy, it was looking at non-structural mitigation, and this is something that we've, like, discovered through everyone is, like, the big issue is insurance.
well, and I have a question after I say this, but it's not just flood insurance at this point.
Right,
No,
right,
no,
I mean, flood
just
insurance is
homeowners.
federally subsidized, but, you know, homeowners insurance is the private sector, and we don't have a whole lot of influence on that,
Right,
right?
so your purpose in what you're working on right here was more or less just to feel out the buyouts?
Not
And
necessarily
elevations.
buyouts,
And
just looking
elevations.
at like the non-structural mitigation strategies, the big fancy term to just say yes, like home elevation and voluntary acquisition, just thinking through those things. Because, you know, I mean, I know you understand this, right? At some point, right, it becomes economically infeasible to continue to do either of them, right? Like to do nothing or to elevate. So, particularly really on the coast, right? Places like Plaquemines or, you know, Cameron Parish that we looked at, right? Like they can't go any higher. Sorry.
I can't sit here and be quiet anymore. So until last year, I was the deputy director of the Maryland Water Quality Finance Administration. We had 7,800 miles of shoreline with so many people in flood zones. It was staggering. But early in my career, I managed FEMA hazard mitigation grants for buyout, riparian, stream corridor restoration. There'd been a 500-year flood, you know, not too steep of a stream valley, but every single home had 10 feet of water. You come in, the mold, the smell, I mean, it was just the most disgusting. I mean, I've worked in wastewater plants on the West Bank, and I go in these homes, and it's just as disgusting. People can't live in there. I'm wondering how many times that lady in Slidell was offered a buyout. But it's like people were desperate for voluntary buyouts and relocations. But, you know, it becomes a philosophical thing where people in DC thinks that everybody in a flood zone needs a buyout. You know, they need to be on the ground in communities saying, okay, we've got this cluster of 6 residents, you know, what is the minimum distance we can move them to safety and keep them together? But it's systems, it's optimization, and studying, it's, you know, it's applying the concepts that are developed. In DC, you know, FEMA, they've got this black box. They won't even tell the state what's in the black box for risk rating 2.0. And it's like they need to get on the ground and figure out exactly what the risk is for discrete individual properties before making blanket policies.
Totally. I'm glad you said that. I appreciate that. Sorry, did you have a question?
I have a couple of questions. First of all, I do have a son that lives in Farley, and he's 2 blocks away from the flood wall. And his insurance, like you said, both his homeowner and his flood insurance went up so much that his escrow went up so much for his note that he almost can't make his house payment. And I never thought I would see that, and especially for it to be my child, that you would lose your home because you can't make your house payment. Because it's going up that much. Okay, my second thing is, Stephensville, you said they had a glitch and we don't have some of the stuff in there?
But we got all of the we weren't able to fill out those spreadsheets with y'all, so that was where we went through.
We rated them on the stickies themselves, so we have that, and that's from opinion based.
Okay.
That was from the room. It's not any specific data coming
so
from anywhere. It's your data.
Okay, on Stephensville, we are very prone to flooding. And what's, you know, we separated from our parish by 60 miles. And not only the flood wall from the backwater, like our particular subdivision that we all live in, we get it from the rainwater. Because we have nothing, once the flood gets, I mean, the water level gets up to a certain limit, then our drains can't plug, they plug the drains, and then the water comes, and we almost flood it from rainwater.
I think even in Morgan City, I think rainwater is a bigger
The
concern
Bayou
than
Chain's gonna
surge.
solve a lot.
Yeah, no, it won't solve the rainwater.
No, because you're not gonna have as high levels that you're gonna have the concern of.
Correct, correct,
So your water
correct.
levels will be down here instead of up here. when
So
you
they
get to
won't
the
do the drains.
So
They
you won't
plug the
have to
drains.
do your drain plugs, your
Right.
sandbag and all that kind of stuff.
That's what we hoping for, that's what we're really hoping for. Cause we did have something FEMA had offered us some money for our subdivision, but it disappeared. We didn't get it.
I had a couple of questions from your part of the presentation. First of all, as I was reading what I was able to read on the screen, and you were reading some of it to us, I kept seeing the phrase non-structural action. And, just a moment ago, you gave a little definition of that, but it would, the slides that you showed would make more sense to me if I had a better definition of what is non-structural action.
And it's very confusing,
and
because
it's-
non-structural,
Exactly.
exactly.
Structural.
That means, so structural protection would be things like levees and
Floodgates.
seawalls, floodgates,
So you
those
mean
kind of
protection
things.
from flooding at all, not specific to the house?
Non-structural tends to be more specific just to a home or a commercial
Yeah.
business, so like dry flood proofing, I know, it's really.
So for
it's
and again, the state they have a kind of simplified definition of non-structural, but they look at elevations of homes, floodproofing of commercial facilities, or voluntary acquisition. So those are the non-structural, but they look at things like levees, floodgates, those types of things. Structural items on the ground are how it's brought
So
to.
structural in that sense means built by tax dollars, not an individual homeowner doing something to their
No,
structure.
because non-structural, it can also be tax dollars. So it has more to do with the actual built,
And if we think of gray
entity.
infrastructure, that would be your, what we typically think of as like infrastructure projects would generally fall under your structural protection.
Well, I recommend that you come up with another phrase, just for clarity for the future.
Yeah, I think it would help to have a definition. The problem is we have to use those because that's the way it's phrased.
We'll tell the higher ups that when they're talking to the general
yeah.
public, don't use definitions.
One of the best ways I've heard it phrased is the whole purpose of this is to give people an off-ramp to the cycle of poverty that results from repetitively flooded properties. If they don't want the off-ramp, don't force them on it, but people are desperate for this assistance. My dry cleaner in Baltimore, 2 weeks ago, afternoon thunderstorm, he owns his own building by a creek. He had 8 feet of water take out everything, his whole building. He lost, Asian immigrants, they've been running this own business for decades, lost everything in an afternoon. Those are the people that need buyouts.
Okay, so I was talking specifically about the definition of structural versus non-structural, but
Oh, yeah.
thank you, because now you've segued to my next question, which is about voluntary acquisitions. We're also using the word voluntary, and to me, voluntary means you're being given a choice. You can take it or leave it.
Yes.
But the reality on the ground is they don't always feel very voluntary, because sometimes when you don't take it, you're saying, okay, but if you don't let us buy you out, here's what you can't do anymore with your property. First of all, you're not gonna get insurance. Second, you're not gonna get help to rebuild. They have all these restrictions, so it's not all that voluntary.
And it might be a one-time offer. If you don't take it now, this isn't, so if that, it's
There's
like.
a question of that, it's not a guarantee, but no, I agree, it's just, the problem is, we have to use the phrases that are in the lexicon, right? And that are in these plans and programs, I agree with you, because the difference is, involuntary acquisition, that's eminent domain, and then you're talking about,
But that's one thing,
not your choice.
that's one thing inside out, I forget the term they use, but it's like, oh, we're being voluntold, is the term they, and this is voluntold.
Yeah, that's all to add up to the concept.
Yeah.
All right.
Buyout restrictions, when the property has been bought out, it's like forever, till Jesus comes back, nobody can do anything anymore with that property. I believe if they would adjust those restrictions, because where we live here, property properties that have been bought out, we know, okay, so you can't build a house, you can't build a commercial building or any of that. But, in many cases, you can have a hunting lease, people can go hunt, or they can go fish, or what have you. So, as long as the buyout restrictions only talk about building structures, but do not limit the income earning capacity of that property, it's gonna be better received. Because right now, when somebody thinks of buyout with restrictions, they're thinking, okay, it's dead land, that's it forever, it's just throwaway land, it's garbage now, nobody can do anything with it. And the city's not gonna get any tax dollars from it either. So if they could have ways to list the productive uses of land that has been bought out, that don't involve building structures, then it would be a little easier to sell.
That's a wonderful segue. I mean, the 500-year flood I mentioned earlier, the properties were acquired, the stream bank was restored, environmental restoration. The Water Institute's been great about studying how carbon credits can be generated and pay for that. But it gets conveyed to the community for park space, a trail along a stream, or it gets conveyed to the National Wildlife Refuge System, wildlife protection. And then Fish and Wildlife Service pays the community.
Well, what about an option for an individual to buy that land, not to build, but to have something on it that is income producing, but it's still private? For example, a crawfish pond, so that it doesn't always have to become the burden of the government, the city or the county.
All right, if we could get this, yeah, those are all really good points and good questions. I wanna move to this, just because we really wanna get your feedback on this as well. So this is the decision support tool, we're calling it, that looked at lots of data and imported that data in here to make it look nice. But we did one for each community. So I'm gonna start with Morgan City, and when this becomes publicly available, this is sort of the launching screen where you'll see where we looked at population information, flood exposure over time, looking at the master plan, the coastal master plan flood depths for each community, and then we discussed flood insurance earlier. This gives you an idea of the number of federally declared disasters and how many policies are in your community, how many structures might be at risk, and then drive time to services, which Scott showed you earlier, just the initial graphs that we were looking at. We've been able to plot that into the dashboard here. So I'm gonna start with population.
Again, we're gonna make this, once we get this refined and get all the glitches out of it, this is gonna be made available to all of you. So this isn't something we're gonna take and just keep back in the office. We built this for you and for the communities who we worked with.
And
hopefully
you're actually
others.
the second group that's seen. Yesterday's slide out was the first group that had seen this outside of our internal team, so that was 5 people. So you're really kind of the first to see this. So this is why your feedback is helpful. Okay, so for Morgan City and surrounding areas, we looked at your community demographics, so your median home value compared to the coast, median income, your percent poverty, disabled population, your over 65 population, non-white, Black population, Asian population, Native American, comparing that to the coast. And then this also, one thing that that I think is really helpful about this is it shows population changes over time, over 20 years as opposed to 10 years. So you get a fuller picture of what has been going on along the coast. I'm gonna try to click, it's a little persnickety here. Zoom in, area here. And there's so much data that it does take a minute to load.
Do y'all have any data of how our coastline only in St. Mary Parish seems to be growing from the
in the Wax Lake Delta area. We don't have, I don't think we have the,
Cause I mean, I think that's, like, insurance companies should take that in consideration, I mean.
this is, yeah.
We're not disappearing, you know?
The Wax Lake Delta is, I think, the only active land building delta in the coast, and I think that's a part of the reason why this area is more protected from storm surge, because it is in a land growing area.
So when we zoom in here, to get a closer look at your community, you can see here that in some areas you've gained, in some areas you've lost population, and then the like lighter orange here is a 5 to 50% loss. So we're looking at, and this is where it gets tricky too, because in some cases, right, you're dealing with smaller populations to begin with. So in this case, you know, a loss of 23 people in 20 years reflects a 6% decline in population, or decrease in population. Here, you know, you're looking at 1,000, but you started off with almost 22,000. And then, let's take a look at this dark red. Okay, yeah, that's a loss of 28 people, so 100% loss, but.
And that's gonna be one of the areas outside of the named community, so I think in the pension basin, so outside of any community, so there's only, you said 28 people in that area? According to the census, so this is based on census block data.
That was the family that lived on Boca Island.
Yeah.
So I really love that you're looking at this, because then you can provide the context to like, oh, that was that family that, yeah.
What is the green on the right?
This,
That's gain, population gain?
This is Terrebonne.
It's so far south. So
Yeah,
it's
it
that
looks
much
like
of a population
you're
gain?
of 10 people, an increase of 10 people, basically. So it's showing a 5 to 50%.
So it went from 85 to 150 back down to 95.
Yeah.
Do you have anything on Stevens?
Yes, we're gonna get to, that's a whole separate
Oh,
check,
that's-
so I have to
We
get
pulled
to.
Stevens,
That's fine, that's
we
fine.
pulled Stevensville out separately also,
Okay,
so.
thanks.
Right.
I think, and let me, could I just say something? One of the reasons why, and it's so interesting that they're here, and we wanted them to come here, was because they had the choice to do this in different areas in the state. So Cameron, Slidell, here's our area, and we can see how things are done. And so when they're here, we actually have input in what we see. And that's why we wanted them to come here, so that we could see. Because when someone sees that, Allison, you're saying population increase, oh my goodness, 50%. Well, 5 people could have had a child each.
Right.
I mean, but when those things go up to Washington DC and they look at all this and.
Just look at the pure percentage.
Yeah, so that's why it's so important for us to have people come here to our community and be here, so they can see what we really are dealing with in real time.
Yeah,
But-
because that brown area in St. Mary Parish is pretty much uninhabited as it is, so any slight change one way or another is gonna show high percentages.
Right, and like, one thing we thought was interesting is, just real quick, like Plaquemines down here, right? You've had a population, 100% increase, but you're talking 3 people, so.
Well, it went from 3 down to 0, back up to 6, so. Show them how to switch back and forth between communities.
Yes. Were there any questions or feedback on that particular part of the dashboard? No?
And keep in mind, anything that you wanna see, let us know, and we'll, if it's possible, you know, if the data's there, we can find ways to get it. If it's not, we'll let you know.
And we just wanna thank y'all for coming on the front.
Oh, I mean,
It's helpful for us too.
that's good. We're glad to give back to, I mean, you guys gave us so much, we're glad to provide something back to the community.
So on the table of contents, to select your community, you just essentially select it, let it load for a second, and then I can pull up that same thing, the same part of the dashboard for population. And again, you know, your demographics are here, you have your median home value compared to the coast. Your median income is higher, looks like. Poverty is lower, disabled is higher than coastwide. Over 65 population, non-white, Black, Asian, Native American.
I also mentioned with Stevensville, because the census doesn't, you don't show up as a community, and that we took the part of the census that included Stevensville, so there might be a portion of this that kind of extends a little bit outside that's included in these numbers.
I'm gonna zoom into Stevensville here. The information's more or less the same as what we just saw, like as far as percent population change, but, anyone have questions?
What's the population change?
Let's do that. It says 5 to 50% loss, but let me actually get closer or zoom out, because.
Those are 2010 figures, right?
No, so this population change looks at the population change from 2000 to 2020. So in some cases, you might have lost population in 2010 and regained it in 2020, or vice versa. I personally like to see the bigger picture of more historic population change, because I think sometimes when you look at just the decadal census, it doesn't tell you the full picture of what your community is actually dealing with.
How long does that master plan go to?
50 years, so it's a 50-year plan, but they're on the third iteration of it. So it's a 50-year plan in 2012, then a 50-year plan in 2017, and now a 50-year plan for 2023. But that's when they keep modeling further out to the future, and as better data becomes available.
Yeah, this one is a little interesting. So you're looking at a growth in Thibodeau, but
I think
St.
that's-
Martin, so a loss of 12 people.
I think
It's
that's
the same
probably-
area again.
that's
Yeah,
probably Stevensville then.
yeah, it
'Cause there's-
is. I was just wondering if there might be some
So like,
other
put it back on
census trends.
Stevensville? So you saying, they were saying only 50 people was in the population?
Well,
What the
in
population
that
is?
tract though, and that's what's tricky about it,
It's
because
basically
like in
like
this
some-
one, so the lines are a little bit more clear in Morgan City. Here, I'm just kind of poking around and seeing that, in this area it might show a 9% loss, but then here it
Like
shows
so
24% loss, so it depends on what tract you're looking at.
These are Clara grid cells, so they're,
Oh,
or Clara
yes,
views, so
sorry.
these are,
Not,
It's not actually the population.
do you wanna clarify that? That's what she said.
It's confusing, because it's saying we only have 38 people in Stevensville?
No.
What does that, I don't
It's-
understand that.
It's plain grid cells, because
well, I'm not sure which one, hover over Stevensville, like the actual one.
yeah, but see how it's saying like
Yeah,
St.
that's
Martin
because
here.
we lowered
Yeah,
St. Martin.
because Stevensville
Yes.
isn't a grid, so that's the one that Stevensville falls in, is the one where the name is.
Then you can, it depends on what you're highlighting.
That one, that's the one I
Yeah.
was looking at, so that's probably referring to Stevensville, which is lower St. Martin, separated from the parish, but we have
That's-
38
yeah, that's the
people,
s-
that's confusing.
Yeah, that's the St. Martin, so hover over it. So that's St. Martin Parish and then in the Verret Basin, so it's the portion of St. Martin Parish in the Verret. And what's up,
This,
the lighter one? Yeah, we'll have to do a better job with,
Stevensville's tricky.
well, we don't know what Jordan counted as Stevensville for this, so we'll need to,
But I do remember that discussion.
And if I'm looking at that, I'm assuming that we only have 38 people in Stevensville.
I think when you actually hover over where the actual word Stevensville is, it's 1,300 for that one.
Okay, I don't want to spend that much time, I'm
No.
just trying to.
No, that's something we need
understand
to-
it.
It's
Yeah.
something, yeah, we'll add that too. Add it to the list. Let's see.
When you say only 30 people, then that really limits our funding or whatever else that this is gonna be, that depends on, so that's important.
So we're going back to Morgan City.
That could be the area right north of Stephensville, right? Between Stephensville and Pierre Park, probably?
That's what I think it is.
Mhm.
Do you wanna
You said
explain
the
this?
actual's 13.
Mhm.
Do you wanna explain this one from the coastal master plan?
Sure. So right now, what we're showing here is what the master plan shows for your current flood risk. So, you know, a 500-year storm, a 100-year storm, or a 10-year storm. So the level of inundation from these storms. So, a 10-year storm, there's a 10% chance of it occurring. I think Ally and I both like going with the percentage better than calling it a 500-year storm or 100.
I prefer calling it the annual chance event, so meaning like you have a 10% chance in any given year that you might flood in this area. Whereas the 1% chance or the 100-year floodplain, that doesn't mean you're gonna have a flood in 100 years. It means you have a 1% chance every year of having flooding in this particular area. And here, like, you know, a 0.2% chance in any year of having this area flood.
So this is the flood depths that would result from these storms. And what is I mean, we can see there's a few areas in Morgan City and areas probably on the outside of the flood wall where you see higher, which makes sense, outside the flood wall you're gonna see. But for the most part, under current conditions, it's at 1 to 4 feet we see from all of these storms. I think the blue goes up to 4 to 7 feet. So if you get hit with the 1 in 5, or the 1 in 500-year storm, the 0.2% chance, you're gonna see a bit more of the flooding in Morgan City if you get hit with a major storm. Now the future flood risk, and this is where the master plan models are showing, we can see, particularly, what year did we go out to for this?
This is 50, but you can adjust,
Oh,
the years.
So right now,
as well
this
as
is 50 years in the future, so what would that same storm do 50 years in the future? So you can see that, we start getting into the 7 to 10 feet in some areas, the 10 to 12 feet. When we get out here, we still don't see anything in other places. We start seeing that 21 plus feet, but you're still seeing a lot of that 13 to 16 feet in there. And we can adjust, so if we want to slide it out, we want to say, 50 years in the future, I mean, that's where we're thinking, okay, that's when my grandkids are grandparents. But what does it mean, 20 years in the future? And you can see that it looks very similar.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What changes are they expecting to happen? I mean, are the storms supposed to get bigger? I mean, what's going on with
But a lot of
One
this
thing
is,
to go along with that, is this based on storm surge inundation? Or is it storm surge inundation plus rain?
it's storm surge, and rain is included in the master plan modeling, I believe, but I don't think it includes riverine. And I think that's where the watershed initiative is kind of looking at that compound where you have the riverine and the surge base. So, and the difference is primarily going to be changes in sea level rise. So the waters are getting higher, plus subsidence. So if you have kind of land subsiding, it's gonna get worse. And I believe this is future without action, so this is that's basically if we freeze coastal restoration, basically where it is now, not with the master plan fully implemented, not with additional structures put in place. So it does account for the levees and things like that are currently on the landscape.
It does, as of what date? Do you know that?
Yeah, this is the so it's the future without action. So whenever they hold the stuff for the 2023 master plan, so it would be within the last year or two of whatever was on the landscape.
Context for this question, Hurricane Harvey comes in, stalls over Houston, inland a little bit for 4 days. Now you got people wanting to build a seawall to block the flooding. It's like the flood came from the other direction. It's rainwater. It's not, but, by not defining this on the front end, what the cause of the flooding is, you're just throwing literally hundreds of billions at a solution that's not going to work.
Or it could potentially make it worse if your flood wall is preventing water from escaping out.
So this corner one, future.
Down here, this is
Yes, okay, so that's the dark gray areas are the next, what, 10 years, or this
Yes,
is
or this is 20.
20?
In a high scenario.
Okay.
Okay, so-
I can also select.
Yeah, so in the master plan, they use two different scenarios with sea level rise, and they use the kind of the IPCC and kind of NOAA guidelines for determining what sea levels will be. So they did go with the high and low scenario. So if you want to change that to low, and then
But what's crazy is like, I don't even see Golden Farms, that's currently a flood zone now, like nowhere near shaded in there at all, like on the Berwick side.
Where is that?
On the Berwick side.
Can you, would you
yeah.
mind pointing here?
A little bit.
Oh, here,
Up a little bit. Okay, down a
There?
little bit,
okay,
a little further down,
okay,
closer to.
Around in here.
Yeah, right there by the end.
Here?
Right there by the end, yeah.
okay.
That's all flood zone.
Yeah.
Well, half of
it could be that it's,
Just
it could be that it's querying out just Morgan City for this.
Okay.
So it might be, well, I
That
mean,
is a good
they're
question.
showing it here, right?
Yeah, they are,
Okay.
that's what he, but this is also like
This
a
is a-
10-year
this is a
flood,
10-year,
so this
so
is,
that area
it's
might
not
not-
as big of an event. As opposed to like, here's your, typically when they define those flood zones, that's like a 100-year floodplain. So that's the storm you're looking at right there.
Okay.
So yeah, the
This is a smaller event, this
Okay.
is bigger, and then this is even bigger.
And the FEMA flood maps, yeah, they're generally based on the 100-year.
Yeah.
They'll show the 100-year and 500-year. And the 10-year, I mean, that's kind of what we would consider nuisance flooding, which, yeah,
And we get it a lot.
Hey, is this
Yeah.
pulled from the FEMA suite of model runs, or is this something that CPRA did?
CPRA.
Did it
CPRA
on
data.
their own?
Yeah.
I think what's confusing is that we're only seeing Morgan City, and you're saying it's storm surge, but you're not really seeing where it's coming from. So is it something that's pushed up into Lake Palourde, or is it
River.
coming up river? That's what's a little bit confusing, because you're not seeing
full
the whole
picture.
picture.
That could be something we can,
It's something I think that needs to be clarified, because my understanding is when they're running these models, they're running a lot of different scenarios to get to this. It's not just like, oh, hey, it was storm hit at this point, like they're considering.
but I think,
I
Yeah,
got
they're taking an
all
entire
scenarios.
suite
Right.
of model runs that are running here,
Right.
here, and they're basically pulling all that information together. Worst case scenario,
coming up with a composite
here it is,
storm.
but again, some of this just, it's just.
But I think what we probably need, and maybe what would be helpful for you, is right now it just shows Morgan City. We need to be able to turn off that query, still be zoomed in on Morgan City, but see what's going on down here.
Yeah,
And
I
see
think,
so I think the confusion is we're looking at Morgan City kind of, because we pulled it out, which we wanted to do to be able to show you Morgan City, but I think maybe there needs to be a way to kind of turn off the Morgan City query so you can see flooding higher and lower.
So this is the type of stuff that insurance companies get scared about.
Right.
That's what they do.
Let's see that, the low scenario.
Yeah.
I mean,
what Greg just said just kind of struck me. How much of all of this data that CPRA has gathered is used by insurance to
It's like
determine?
They have their own modelers, their own, yeah, they're not.
And then will we know they're not really modeling accurately? Not the insurance companies.
And not taking things like coastal restoration projects that are planned in the future in their, so just to kind of, so we changed this to the low scenario from the high scenario, and then put it out to 50 years, and all that area that was that bright orange over there, you can see under the lower environmental scenario, it drops considerably down to 7 to 10 feet. So I think some of that, looking at that environmental, it's kind of high is kind of your worst case scenario, and
I mean, I mentioned earlier, FEMA will not even tell CPRA what goes into their calculations.
Wow.
You know, Attorney General's, presented legal action against FEMA because of that.
Right, and that's just crazy.
I will say as a researcher too, it's very frustrating because we can't get to those answers because we don't have their data.
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
So,
Let me just
Do
ask
our
a question.
congressmen get to see?
Yeah, I'm
No,
just.
That's a great
Legislative-
question, that's a
question.
really, really good question.
Just curious.
I wish we'd have a couple of them here today for this
We
meeting.
have one.
No, I'm talking about
Big time,
No,
yeah.
I'm
Federal.
talking,
Sorry.
Federal,
I'm
yeah.
talking federal,
Federal.
our congressman.
The last congressman I asked doesn't get to see the data either, it's truly in a black box that.
Well, aren't they suing right now to get it open, isn't?
Yes, the
Representative
attorney general
Jeff-
has filed suit.
But Scalise isn't, yeah, I think there's a
You mean a separate
Yeah.
congressional suit?
I
I'm
think
not aware
he's
if there may be.
demanding that right now or something, and whatever, I don't know.
Well, Congress actually has subpoena power, so,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah, I
try
think that's
that.
what they're doing right now.
So tax dollars are being paid to do the coastal master plan, so that's.
Yeah, well, there's some.
no, it's CPRA, right?
Well, there is, I mean, CPRA does receive state funding, obviously, they're a state agency, but a lot of the funding, it comes from several different pots of money. There's, a lot of it came from the BP oil spill, I mean, from the settlement dollars, so a lot of them.
Remediate, so we're not really getting the remediation if the data's not being used.
Yeah, it's, so the BP funds, there's a bunch of, and I can't even, I mean, all the different pots of money and the way it goes, but yeah, some of it.
It was
How they
to
figure stuff
restore,
out.
what the damage done by the Deepwater Horizon, so if it's to restore, it's not being used.
And actually, the
It's
national,
paid for nothing.
the National Academy's Gulf Research Program, who funded this particular project, and a lot of other ones, I mean, their funding came from, I mean, their kind of research funds came from the BP settlement to kind of look at the types of things we're looking at. So there's a lot of different pots of money that
It's gotta be
Treasury
money well
controls with
spent
that.
and have a
Yeah.
significant impact. It's gotta be used.
So there's a whole lot of these studies out there that run down parallel lines from each other, right?
What do you mean?
Like, well, you got the CPDA or whatever they are, you got you guys, you got the federal guys, you got the state guys, you got the insurance company, they're all following the science, and guess what? They all come up with a different answer, so where's the science? It's all slanted towards what you want
and
to
all the
say.
universities, I mean, how many, I mean, they do. I mean, yeah, and college professors are doing their own studies too, that we don't even, but I think that's part of why we wanted to make sure on like, we pulled an advisory group together on this project, and we included someone from CPRA on our advisory group, so we can present the data to them, and someone from Office of Community Development, so we have, and Louisiana Sea Grant, so we tried to pull in folks so we can, you know, the ones who can potentially use this information to make sure that what we have here doesn't, you know, end up in another black box with a lot of things. And then trying to make these data available to you all after, so even when we're not here, when you can look through this, it's like, you know, give you everything that we can.
Now, I will say EPA is very easy to work with between states and federal in data sharing. FEMA's its own animal. Stafford Act, that is such a rigid law, it needs to be updated in that way.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, trying to find data, I mean, to your point, just for mapping data, to do this and other projects, for some of the FEMA stuff, I'm like, do we have this, is this available? And it's like, I've never seen, but EPA is, and some of the other agencies, you know, there's different degrees of light in some of these black boxes out there.
Question, how can this help us?
It basically provides the same information that decision makers are looking at available to the public. It
Okay.
helps you to make individual decisions, to know what's out there. Our job is not to tell you one way or another. Our job is to present the data. We're an applied research institute, so we study all this, we compile it, and to my knowledge, there's nothing like this out there.
Oh, and then from a financial perspective, I mean, I have 7,800 miles of shoreline under my management. And I needed to know how much funding we needed to protect that and preserve communities. You know, this kind of data is invaluable in terms of financial projections.
Yeah.
You know, because that's kind of an average of everything, but, you know, losing the granularity is when you get issues with.
Totally. Well, and for someone like people like us, we read all these reports, right? So sometimes they're 400 pages to 3,000 pages. You don't have time to do that, right? That's our job. So sometimes all that information in there, it's good information, but who has time to read it? So what we do in this case is get all the information we can, compile it, and be able to visually provide that information so you have a snapshot of what that looks like.
And we'll also go to you and say, what more do you need to make this useful to you? I mean, I think based on your reaction when we went to this slide, that
Yeah.
the real estate folks are.
This is.
I mean, if we're not talking to the insurance companies, and I don't mean to be like devil's advocate here, but if, this information, everybody here's, homeowners here, got property here, they've been here. The main thing is the insurance. We can have all that data we want. If y'all not talking to insurance companies, we're doing like every other study we've been doing for the last 100 years. We're just throwing money away. If the insurance companies don't listen and change it, we're wasting everybody's time and money here. And we're spending government money to do this. Why don't we put pressure on the insurance companies? Put pressure on somebody. We gotta come together. I mean, you're saying you got 4 different, plenty of different entities doing studies. I hate studies. I'm sorry to say that, but I mean, we do studies all the time. If we're not doing the study for the right reason and talking to the right people, I mean, what's our end game?
What's the solution for you? What do you think?
Well, we are gonna do.
I mean, insurance is everybody's solution right now. I mean, we could get the insurance rates down and we could put pressure on them. If they're not using this study.
Data, how do we convince them?
So,
I
but
have no idea.
here's the thing,
I have no
based
clue.
off of what he's saying, is for the past, 15 years, communities, levy districts have been working to protect communities from flood insurance, not from actual floods. Morgan City's a perfect example. They haven't flooded, not to say that it won't happen. So we have increased protection structurally. And now here it comes, they move the goalpost and, what you did doesn't count for anything, absolutely nothing.
I actually want to get to that because it's a really good point. And I'm not debating you, I live here too. I'm
Yes.
frustrated too, and I'm with you. I would like a solution, that's why if you have ideas.
And that's what we
by all
need to
means.
know, we need to know, okay, previous, go build flood protection. Levees, flood walls, whatever, contain small communities and ring levees, pump stations, this, that, and other. Now, we don't even know where to go. We don't know if we should continue to spend the money on this protection because it's not giving us what we need from flood insurance as it is. So we're kind of stuck. As far as non-structural buyouts, you come to a place like Morgan City, Berwick, Stephensville. No, you're not buying us out. We're not leaving. You may find very small pockets that would possibly be interested in home elevation, but it's not gonna be blanket wide.
Well, and to your point too, there's not enough money to buy everybody.
No, that's the other.
So it is looking at those pockets because we know this, not everyone's gonna take a buyout. That's what we found in the research too, right? Like, there's not 100% buy-in on the buyout. So what do you do then?
But are the
Right?
people that make these decisions actually seeing your stuff?
So the
They
people that are
will.
pushing the federal government in
They
this
will.
direction live in Annapolis, Maryland,
Right.
and Newport, Rhode Island.
Right. And
we
they
are-
have no clue about South America.
But yes,
Correct.
CPRA, we have one of the CPRA master plan people is on our advisory committee, and part of our next, after we finish the meetings with all of you, one of our requirements that we put on ourselves is we are going to present these data to a broader CPRA team and Office of Community Development.
And I think the other thing is before CPRA says, hey, let's do some buyouts, or let's do some home elevation, you gotta do what you guys are doing. You gotta come to the community and you gotta talk to those folks, because you might be wasting your time and your money at that point.
And the 2023 master plan just came out this past spring. They're already starting work on the 2029 plan, and part of that work, and they actually did a better job getting out in the communities. I think each master plan they've subsequently gotten better, but the key is be here now. Be at the start of the planning, and I think they're. Yeah.
Well, I'll give you another good example. The Corps did their 3x3x3 study on the west end of the parish. It was the South Central Coastal Study they did a couple years ago. We were there from day one, saying, here's the things you need to look at. Hey, we got information here we can give you. We got information here. We want to share everything. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Here it is. They took absolutely zero of that information. They did not listen to anything we had to say. Their minds were made up before they even started the study. And you're smiling
We're
like you've
laughing
been there.
because we're doing a project where we look at those issues and we go, listen, because it deals with, it speaks to equity, right? Like, we're laughing because we have this monster of a project that deals with just that.
We're actually going through and
Line
looking
by
at the,
line and
at
going,
the, at
listen.
each of the public comments, reading all of the public comments and seeing what people were saying and seeing if what you just said is actually what happened.
Yeah, and they basically kind of swept us to the side, did their project as they saw fit, without any local input, and we got nothing out of it.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if they would have worked with us, we could have possibly gotten, whether it be some federal funding for structural improvements, things, it's so funny.
Well, we have that year of planning with the Water Institute, Scott, right? With the Resilience Lab in St. Mary Parish.
Putting a facility in St.
Here.
Mary here, instead of having decision makers in Baton Rouge or in Washington, but a resilience lab here on the coast.
And with the near here, with that in place, I mean, the research needs to be here for all of the Atchafalaya, but, you know, I think that's.
Yeah, we're trying to get people not to ignore.
Well, and that's
their
the thing,
input.
some
Yeah.
of this
Because then you have to
research,
live it.
some of this research could go directly against what they're showing us up there, that in 50 years, Morgan City is gonna be underwater.
Well, that's the thing, if we're trying to get rid of Morgan City, we definitely know what to do here. I mean,
Yeah.
it's nothing gonna be here. I mean, all these studies show it is like we're doomsday here, basically.
I mean, we do have a new
It's like with
insurance
Xbox and other commissioner.
commissioner coming in. I have no idea what he's gonna do, and I don't know if Representative Amade knows what he's gonna do or what he can do. I mean, you're working with private companies that are for-profit, which are insurance companies. How do you get private entities like that to come and do business here and do it at a reasonable rate below I-10? Because anything below I-10 in Louisiana is considered for homeowners, for our costs. And, you know, and so I'm waiting to see what's gonna happen, because I don't think the legislature knows. I don't know what the answer is, and they
Well,
can
I
do
think
all the studies they want.
Yeah.
It's trying to convince for-profit companies like State Farm or Allstate or whoever to come here and take care of us, and take care of us properly at a decent rate.
So Mike, I have a quick question, this is kind of off their slide, but the Shane project, shouldn't that have reduced our insurance rates?
That
was
should have-
something to.
That should do it.
No,
All
I'm
this
not just
stuff.
asking.
No, and I'm only laughing because
Yeah.
it's like, you know, we have done flood protection based on
Right.
things that have happened in the past. And
It's not,
yeah,
they don't
just-
get it.
They don't
That's
get
what I'm
it,
saying.
and
That's
it's
my
like,
point.
honestly, it's like none of it exists.
Right.
Perfect example with the 3x3 with the Corps. They came in and said, nothing in Morgan City was built to a standard that was acceptable to them. Therefore, in order to get what would qualify as protection, you would have to go in and tear down the flood walls, the levees, everything, and build it to this HISDR standard that no one can afford. Because it's such a strict standard, you just can't build anything, you know?
One problem for Louisiana is that other states are not as advanced as the CPRA in terms of modeling and capabilities. Really, it's the national model for how to do this. But if there's one state that's doing it right, FEMA should be able to defer to them in their data. That should be the maps in effect. But instead, statute act being so rigid, they can't. It comes back to federal reform.
And so the insults that we've seen since Katrina, and we remedied it a little bit through Congress, but apparently with 2.0, we're still not done, is that, just as he was describing, when they come to redo the flood risk rating maps, they only take into consideration any flood control device or mechanism that is up to core standards. And so the way we've explained it to the public is, if you have an 8-foot levee, but the Corps says it needs to be a 10-foot levee, FEMA assesses your flood risk as if there's no levee whatsoever. And so, you know, an 8-year-old can see the absurdity in that, but FEMA can't. And,
They must all be 6.
maybe, that might be something.
So, you know, the thing what we need to do is, we need the government to pick a study amongst all the studies and say, this is it, present it to the insurance company, say, this is what you're gonna base your stuff on, and you're gonna be fair and equitable, and a shotgun will help.
And but I think to his point, I mean, in terms of flood risk and modeling, CPRA is, and Louisiana is top in the country, if not the world, in that. But, you know, so that is what FEMA should be using, but you know, they're trying to find something consistent that they have nationwide, and if you're using a nationwide consistency, are they throwing out because it's not consistent, because it's too good?
David, I have just for a minute, I'll get through and calculate how many political contributions the insurance and reinsurance industries have made.
I think it's great.
And I'm sure they're accurate.
Well, now, and we do have stuff on risk rating 2.0 in here, just to sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, these are the disaster declarations since 2000, for St. Mary Parish. So, hurricane, dark blue, tropical storm, lighter blue, and then the green are flood events. In that second paragraph, it says, over that period, there were approximately 157 individual claims, and then it says, estimated payments on those claims totaled 1.5 million. Are those only the claims of the city? Or are those also the claims?
I believe it's parish-wide.
Okay, so that would not just be for the municipalities, but for the individuals, commercial property owners, all of them.
That's a good question.
Sounds really tiny.
Right, and that's a good question. I'm not actually certain about that. That would be something we need to clarify.
That's great. Which amounted to 1.5 million. That adds up to $50,000 a year. And I'm thinking with the amount we pay to FEMA for flood insurance, surely Morgan City altogether has paid much more than $50,000 a year. So what's the big problem? Just saying. Yeah.
Paying forever.
Because that's also, this on the right here just looks at the total policies in effect right now, or I guess from maybe last year. And then it looks at, since risk rating 2.0 is implemented, what the average, or the number of policies going up by $10, or up to 20, or up to 30, or up to 40.
So apparently you have 10 people in the parish who, their policies will actually go down under risk rating 2.0.
See,
The other
I think
1,915
I feel like
are
those
going up.
numbers are skewed based, you know, they show this huge amount of people that it's only $10, but that's $10, that's.
And this is
it's
FEMA
skewed.
reporting,
Yeah,
this
very
captures
skewed.
their data, and something someone said yesterday, which I think is a good point, is, we need to include the total number of structures, residential structures, so you can see what percentage has flood insurance and what doesn't.
Well, and what the increase is
Right.
overall,
Real
not
increase.
just from year to year.
Right.
Because you
Well-
have a limit.
Yeah, and so, right, you're capped at 18%, increases every year. Years to full adjustment year would be 27 years that it would go up every year. But my question is, that I still can't get answered. My question is, if your risk goes up, if it increases, can they change the goalposts to increase it further? If the whole point is getting to your actuarial risk,
But
are
that's
they
gonna-
factoring that in the
that's
future?
gonna keep
That's my
climbing.
question, because I don't know,
That's gonna
and
keep
I
climbing.
can't get that answered anywhere.
Yeah, and I mean, we're seeing rates $8,000 a year and more.
Right, so your chart says that nobody has a premium that went up more than $40, so we know right there the chart's wrong.
No, those chart
No,
numbers,
this comes directly from FEMA reporting, so
That's
this
what I'm saying.
isn't, yeah,
They're-
right.
they have some way to justify those charts
Oh,
that
more
don't
than
make
40,
any
I see what you're
sense.
saying. I was looking to the left, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, if FEMA believes that nobody in Morgan City has a premium that went up more than $40, then there's your problem
Yeah.
right there. FEMA is somewhere in Disney World.
They in a hole somewhere.
Well, and they should be, and that's not yours, but we've got our realtors here. So if someone's buying a house without insurance, that rate is gonna be, they
Right.
need
have
to
do
factor in is
actual
how,
rate.
what would the cost be for all the homes if they weren't grandfathered in? Like mine went up, maybe $400. But I'm a grandmother, I was grandmothered in, and so if I wanna sell my house and someone has to come in and buy my house, what's the rate of insurance? It's gonna be something like $4,000 or $5,000 a
your
year.
actuarial rate.
Right, so-
Whatever
Actually,
it is.
some of them are
Policy
transferring.
stayed with the house.
Some of them are
Right, some
transferring,
do,
but
yeah.
I'm telling all the buyers, I'm like, look,
Yeah.
this may increase, 10 to 16% every year, and now I know it's 27 years is the goal
Right.
to get their market rate, which is across the board. But what's not fair about it is like, when this was explained in October of 2020 on the news and stuff, it made it sound like FEMA was like, okay, it's not fair that this $1 million beach property has this $400 flood policy that's been transferring through the years, and they're in the flood zone now. So I'm like, yeah, that is unfair. I thought it was gonna help communities where you have like a little $100,000 house that's, in a flood zone that really the risk, it's never flooded before, and it's just not, it's really not fair to, across the board to everybody.
And it's frustrating, cause it also gets to, there are different states that have different flood disclosure laws, right? Florida doesn't have one. So if you're selling your property in Florida, you don't have to tell the buyer that your house is flooded.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
I also think that loans, it's the loan that makes you get the flood insurance.
right.
So I really think they need to start looking at that and going, do we really need to, it only goes up to $250,000 anyway. So let's say I buy $170,000 house in a flood zone, do I really need $170,000 worth of coverage for flood? I really don't. I might get a little water in my house, I think the most you probably ever need on any house is probably, unless it's like the, 500-year flood there comes, but, and I guess that's what they're basing it off of, but I think it's just ridiculous.
They're also only gonna reimburse you for the amount of stuff that was wet, not the rest.
Right.
Yeah.
You're only cutting out half
They
your
don't
load.
consider the
Yeah.
property, they don't consider the structure, the
Structure,
roof.
right.
You're only gonna go up 4 feet,
Right.
Well,
tear it out.
I've already talked to, one of the local bankers and said, don't y'all think y'all need to get involved in this? I mean, this is the people that are borrowing money from you for their houses. And his answer was basically, oh, we have other options, I can just insure it for what you owe.
This is
Where
the
does that
same
leave
point
me?
that someone in
Right.
Slidell made, where are the banks? Why are they not arguing? It's the same point you made.
Because they have an outlet, they could care less,
I don't know why, as a community, I wish we could have our own, flood policy where we, private, separate from FEMA, where we could put all our money into, we can build it up to, I don't know how many billion or million, whatever, to make it and say like, we're good,
That's what I'm thinking.
Like-
It's interesting, you said it hasn't been funded yet, but looking at a pilot project for parametric insurance, so that if, something to that effect, if a big event came, people could be paid out faster to get back in their homes quicker.
So basically, instead of having to wait for someone to come and do the assessment before you can pay them, they look at the storm that came through, the strength of the storm, the damage it did to the community, and pay out right away instead of waiting for an adjuster to come out, so people can recover faster.
It's just something we're looking at, it's not funded yet, we don't know.
But we think that, we think that's important, especially through this project, when you hear about, and that's some of the things that came out in the decision tree with the insurance, is how long it takes the process, and what are people doing while they're waiting for the insurance adjustments. You're gonna be out of your house, you might be staying in a hotel, you might be out of your community, waiting for someone to come. So I think that's part of you know, when we start thinking about this kind of parametric insurance where you can do that, that's important also for, you know, there's something wrong with, someone's gotta be in a hotel for 6 months waiting for someone to come out. Or longer.
I'd like to mention a couple of things. One, the elevation on my house, last year to this year, they changed it. I had an elevation of like a minus 1.5, and then they changed, no, a minus 0.5, and they changed my elevation this year to a 1.5. And so it all got changed. How can my house change that much in elevation?
It may have had something to do with the datum that was used, the vertical datum that was used. Do y'all-
That would be my, that's why I
That would
said,
be the only thing I
that would
could
be my
figure,
guess,
either
is
that or they did.
But they
If
don't
it went
explain
up,
it,
you
and they
better be
can't
careful it
explain
went up.
it. And the insurance company can't explain it. They said they used a different, system. And that's all the
If I
answer
had to put
was.
money on it, it was the
that was a good
geodetic data. So when they connect to the satellites, this stuff is constantly changing. So
Right.
even from year to year, those elevations can change.
To the general public, it doesn't make us
No,
feel
it
like it's
doesn't make any
right.
sense.
So did they drop your premium?
Yeah,
So-
did your premium go down since your house
No,
went up?
my FEMA bill went up $450
There you go. So
every
it
year
doesn't mean
for the
anything.
next 5 years. And my elevation,
A waste of time.
you know, I think my elevation is higher than the water level, you know? So-
help you.
Yeah,
That should help.
so anyway.
But
yeah,
again, I'm in an X zone, and mine went from 400 a year to 4,800.
Yeah, and I talked to insurance companies, I've done all my legwork, and you just can't get the answer. So I'm glad you guys are here, I wanna thank you for helping us, and, you know, anything you do we're grateful. The other thing is, do any of you, watch HTV 10 on TV? Okay, it's a local station out of home in Thibodeau. And I watch them all the time, they're so good. They have gotten so much money for the lock systems, the levees, it's unbelievable. You know the Bayou Chene? That project cost $28 million. They redid that project 3 times. They put the original blockage, they put the second one, and now they got the permanent one.
You're talking
And if
about
you
Bayou
add the
Chene?
3 together,
Yes.
it was $28 million.
82.
And,
Yeah,
huh?
the
82
Bayou
million.
Chene structure was
82 million,
80.
okay.
It was
Reverse
80
that.
million.
The
Reverse
last
that.
I heard was 27. I'm glad you
That's
corrected that.
probably-
That is
That may
even,
have been the money that was invested for emergency closures of 73, 11, 16, and 19. That might have been the total of that, but the permanent structure was $80 million.
wow, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you corrected
And
me on that.
that is a St. Mary Levy District project, not a Terrebonne, Terrebonne project.
Yeah, and we partnered with them on each side of that bayou.
That was my boss.
Yes, and let's get
Okay.
that clear, that's a St. Mary project.
Great, okay, so, with that being said, that whole program I was, listening to, it also said that barge is gonna help Stephensville by 3 feet. It can hold back 3 feet of flooding in the Stephensville area. And that's tremendous, because we didn't have anything holding us back when we flooded a few years ago. And yes, we had a foot of water in the street, but not many of our houses got messed
And
up.
that's, we've had a number of meetings over the past couple of weeks with, we went to Pier Park and we went to Donna to discuss this exact thing. And we brought gauge charts showing the difference that it makes.
Mhm.
So if without the barge, I think the number in Stephensville is somewhere around a plus 3 feet that y'all start having problems.
Mhm.
So if.
It's gonna hold back that.
Well, just hear me out. So if you don't have the barge and you get to a plus 3 or plus 3.5 where you're really having problems, we close the barge. That water immediately, it never gets to that to begin with.
Right.
So now your water on a daily basis with the barge closed is a 1. And then you get a rain event. Guess what? That rain event is not gonna affect you because your water's at a 1, not at a 3. Whereas without the barge, your water's at a 3, Then you get a rain event, you add another, and the rain can't drain because of the barge, the channel pushing back on it.
Right.
So it's just a whole collective of problems. I think people are gonna be pleasantly surprised if and when we do get another riverine event that we have to close it. You know, they're saying, oh, you gotta close it earlier, you gotta close it earlier. I don't think that's gonna be the case, and until we get there, we'll see.
But
Yeah, I
don't listen to
think
what
it's-
you hear on TV,
I think
because
it's
this
gonna
is
be a
your
big
main,
help.
this is your main source for information
Yeah.
on the Bike
Because
Chain project, right
There's a lot of
here.
information out there that is incorrect, so.
Yeah. I know it's
just
gonna
wanna
help,
clarify.
cause I've lived there long enough to experience it.
Well, if you lived there in 16 and 19 in particular,
I
and you
did.
saw, I mean, we had people that lived there, they said they knew when the barge was closed off in emergency
Oh.
because the water immediately
down.
started
Absolutely.
receding,
Yeah,
you know?
I know. That's just another distortion.
Yes, there's lots of them.
Here, the level of exposure, I keep saying exposure, I don't know why. Exposure, would be about 4,000 structures in the flooded area. Under 1,000 flooded to first floor, and then 100 or so above the first floor. So I can click on any of these that you might wanna see, represented in a map. Is there anything in particular you might wanna see, or just pick at random?
So in 30 years, we're all gonna be like, you know, really in a bad situation.
That's a 50% likelihood of exposure, yes, we can adjust the bar down too.
So with that being said, why are we still building houses on slabs?
Thank you. Very good question.
I just wanna know, like.
The State Construction Code Council just passed, I believe a year ago, I can't recall if it's in effect now, but by law, you're supposed to, for new construction, build BFE +1, so 1 foot of freeboard. That's statewide, that doesn't mean you can't go higher, you can, lots of communities do. I'm trying to remember if Morgan City participates in the CRS.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm pretty sure St. Mary and Jim does.
Do you know what rating off the top of your head? I usually know these things, but it's escaping me right now. So you can get, if you implement more, safety measures or mitigation tactics, like if you are part of the CRS, you can increase your flood insurance discount, but, it's also very bureaucratic and takes a lot of work.
So, and the other thing is now, even if you build up, they're penalizing you for building up. Have you seen that?
No, really?
Risk rating 2.0. Now they're saying if you build up, let's say you build a mound of earth.
Oh, because it's fill, you can't
Yeah,
use fill,
yeah,
because
you
then you
can't
flood your
use fill,
neighbors.
right.
It has to be, yeah.
Because you put
Yeah,
it-
okay,
No.
yeah. I was like, wait,
So if Morgan City's 5 to 10% reduction, what would that be, 7 or an 8?
no, a 9 is 5%, 8 is 10, but.
Okay, so 8 or 9.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense, cause they CRS also implemented something like 2021, where prerequisite for an 8 had to be at least a foot above base flood elevation.
It's
So
confusing, cause 10
it
is the,
is-
like.
5 is
lowest
the
level,
minimum,
and
not,
1
yeah,
is the
not,
maximum.
10 is like you don't participate
Right.
really, 9 is like the entry at 5%.
But I don't think there are any 1s or 2s or 3s.
There's like, countrywide, there may be like 1 or 2.
And that's only a 45% reduction.
Right, yeah. But there are like Jefferson Parish, I believe, is a 5. So there are communities in this state that are, that are up there, but they also have the staff and resources dedicated to that, so it's.
CRS is a good program.
It is, it's great, but it also, you have to have the resources to have someone on staff that's tracking all
Frankly,
those
they
things
should
all the
double the
time.
premium reductions in that program.
They should.
Oh, yeah, because
Yes, okay, I'm gonna click on one of these, let's just say in a year's time, you have a 50% chance, say 50% chance of likelihood of flooding to the first floor, 12% of properties.
Flood protection.
Let me get closer so we can zoom in here. Pan a little bit. It would be helpful if we had the border lines, just for. Yeah, that would be helpful too. I wonder if it's because it's so there's so much data it's processing, I wonder if that's one of those things where it's turned off. I don't know for sure. Zoom in here. So what is this? Let's see. Yeah. So that's a percentage of, 15% of structures flooded above the first floor? No, at first floor. I'm learning this in real time as well, because this is very fresh, hot off the presses. So I haven't had a whole lot of time with the tool myself.
But we also specifically said going in that we don't wanna spend days learning it, because we have to spend days learning it, how do we expect other people to use it?
Right, I'm not
So-
trying to. That's a good point.
So those numbers are based off of what?
Yeah.
Like a 0.2 storm, or what's that based off? The flooding?
That is a good chance, that is a good question. I wonder if it goes back to.
Because that's a lot of flooding.
It says 50% probability, go back up.
Yeah.
50% probability of exposure to different levels of flooding, so I think it's probably a composite of, but it's unclear.
Well, like, did they evaluate, like, when we were hit by a hurricane, like when Andrew came through, and when Ida came through, or when,
Like, is it historical flooding or?
well, the ones that we've had in the last 10 years, like when Rita came through and Terrebonne Parish was flooded with Rita, those things, and we didn't have flooding then at all. I'm just curious about, because we have had a lot of
I think that
events.
is clear, just like what is represented.
Have we? We've had a lot of events.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've been lucky.
Just going to the
Our
east
parish
and
has
west
been
of
very
it.
lucky.
Most of
But
it.
I mean, we still have had those events and we've been affected.
This is the last one in front. Almost.
This is the one going back to what we were saying earlier about the different critical and essential facilities like hospitals and fire stations, and, you know, if we, and I think the table on the top shows the time to the closest and then time to the second closest, so you can kind of review what happens if.
So you can isolate these dots to see which service you might be closest to or further away from. So yeah, so in this case, most people are, 83% of
That's
people are
the parish.
less than 5 minutes away.
You should have to birth the baby on there.
5 to 10 minutes, 17%, and then your second closest service, so you're doing pretty well there, pretty well represented. There's also hospitals, trauma centers, fire stations, grocery stores, anything anyone's curious about?
You can't have babies in that one.
You can't have babies?
Not in our house.
Not in ours.
Oh, wait, for real?
That just changed.
You don't have like a.
Oshner took it away.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, okay. I did not know that. So, looking at hospitals then. So you're close, but if you need to have a baby, where do you go? How far is that?
30 minutes. The West End.
Raceland is
Raceland.
or it's a designated spot.
Home of Tiverton.
Wow, that's
Yeah, Oshner
You might
decided
wanna
to spend
say
a lot of
full
money.
service hospital.
But they have had a few in the ER.
Yeah, we did separate by hospital and trauma center, but that's, I was not aware of that, so that is something to consider, cause that, you don't want people having babies in their car, that's not a good situation, so.
Sometimes if they come that fast, they usually pop you.
That's true, that's a good point.
I have a question. So Scott, you mentioned, of course, Wax Lake Outlet and being a land building delta there. And so I'm looking at some of the maps and not really seeing, like especially if you look at the Atchafalaya Delta, and you don't see all of the new land that's out there. And I'm thinking that CPRA does not include any of that because it's built through dredging and beneficial use, that it's not included in any of the calculations when you're talking about flood and inundation. Is that correct, or?
That like the dredge material that is.
Yeah, like we have islands that are out there that are growing trees and everything along the channel that have.
It should be picked up in the terrain models that they use, depending on the timing of it. So when they set the kind of base terrain and the base elevations, that should be included in there.
Okay.
Depending on the time frame of the digital elevation model that they use for it.
Okay.
So we have data from today projected over 50 years.
Yep.
Which some of these models are built on. So from today back 50 years, do we use any of that data in that model for 50 years ahead? I guess what I'm asking is if you look 50 years back,
yes,
this happened. You look 50 years ahead, this is gonna happen, but it doesn't, they're gonna be way off because of projected land
USGS did a great.
being built, higher oceans and whatever.
USGS did like the 1932 to 2016 was the last update that they've done where they've looked historically at land loss over that amount of time. I don't know if that feeds any of the master plan models or if it just provides kind of background context to the current landscape. But USGS particularly.
Yeah, what I'm wondering is that 50 years looking back, should that be included in the 50 years looking ahead to give you the proper data? Because this is what happened in the last 50. Some of that's going to carry over for the next 50, and what we're expecting 50 years ahead may not happen. You got to look back too. You got to learn from.
I'm not a modeler, but it's factored into so many things because we've lost so much land. Like it factors into projections, but it also like FEMA, the way they do their flood risk maps, they look at historical
we already know
data
that that's all
rates.
BS.
They look at So I'm saying like I don't have a perfect answer for you because I don't know the exact answer. It's a very nuanced question, but I do think it factors. I just can't tell you exactly how.
And I think one thing to keep in mind, we just did a study on the West End. And there is, and it goes along with a CPRA study all along the Gulf Coast. Since 2008, I think it's 2000, it's either 8 or 14, 2014, there's been a 6-inch rise in sea level. Like, it's real, it's there. And it's throughout the coast. Now, if you look forward 50 years and you take into account that 6 inches, it's pretty drastic. Is it cyclical? Like you're saying, you kind of got to look back and see. But that's some of that skewing is based on that sea level rise. And yeah, again, it's real. Whether or not it's going to do this or not is a different question.
And some of those changes are going to be like when specific storms hit, like when Katrina hit, and it kind of pushed all of the wetlands, like it opened up a large, so you're gonna see even in that historical, these kind of spikes based on storm events. So there's the issue of, like you said, the 6 inches of water going up, but it's also punctuated by different storms that come in and, they don't just devastate the communities, they have actual
It's not
strong
actually a
physical.
6-inch rise in sea level, but maybe an inch or 2 in sea level, but 6 inches or 4 inches in subsidence and changes in the land mass.
Yeah.
And this does factor for low scenarios and high scenarios, so like there's a range of information provided. But if you guys could, it would be super helpful to get your feedback on this process. If you don't mind taking this, it's 5 questions. I can't even speak. 5 question survey. We'd appreciate your feedback. You can take it really quickly.
I have one more question I'd like to ask about FEMA. It's my understanding that FEMA, if your house is damaged, that they will loan you the money. FEMA loans you the money. You have to pay FEMA back. Is that correct? Because if that's correct, then why am I paying FEMA $2,400, $2,000 every year And then when I get in trouble, they're not gonna give me the money back. I'm gonna have to pay I'm gonna have to borrow the money from FEMA in a loan, and I'll have to pay FEMA back again. So I'm paying them twice. So I could, if my house gets damaged, why don't I just go to the bank, borrow money from the bank, get it paid? Why pay FEMA every year $2,000, $2,400? And then when I get in a bind with FEMA, I've gotta borrow the money from them and they get paid back again. Am I thinking right?
But then to get the loan, you gotta pay
I'm
FEMA in
not
order to get the
certain,
loan
like,
too,
do you
so
mean-
it's,
Are you talking about through flood insurance, or you're talking about disaster recovery funds?
Flood.
Because flood insurance, you should
Flood
get that payout, and that's part of what you're paying for.
I
So-
thought it was my understanding that if you flood, FEMA loans you the money.
If you have insurance.
Oh,
And
if
then
you don't have
pay
insurance.
FEMA back.
I've never heard of that one.
I think that's.
That's what I'm trying to get
That might be a
clarification on,
different
cause I don't know.
But even most of the FEMA programs that come out with grants, yeah, if you qualify, they give you the money.
So I'm paying FEMA now. So if my house floods, FEMA's gonna give me the money to repair it?
Yes.
I won't have to pay them back. It's not a
No,
loan.
no,
Do you
no, no,
mean-
no, it's not. It's insurance. It's just like any other insurance.
Okay, I didn't know that, cause I was thinking all this time I'm paying them that I would
You
have to
gonna
pay them back,
when
cause it was a
premiums go
loan.
next year, you're gonna pay them back. It's just-
Okay, that's a good note to end on for me.
So,
Thank you.
FEMA is a federal program, right? So it's, so flood insurance is a federal government program. It's not a.
Yeah, and I think, if anyone, I mean, I think Monica and Catherine can make our emails available to anyone, so if you have any additional questions, or if you think of anything after this, we'd be glad to.
All state.
I think we have a,
You can.
And then we'll get a copy of the actual tool.
yeah,
That's
and we're gonna, we still have to get something scheduled with Cameron and get their feedback, and once we get, take your comments combined with what we heard in Slidell yesterday, see what we need to add, see what we can do to improve it, and then, hopefully, within a couple months, we can have it finalized. And we can also make it's very similar to the PowerPoint I presented here last year, but it's a few new things. We can make the PowerPoint available also.
That'd be great, yeah. That'd be great.
Great, thank you so much.